we are going to start slideshow. All right, so now that we are actually functioning, we'll go ahead and get started. As you all, I'm sure, saw in the email that went out, we're going to be talking about icons and symbols and technology today. It seems really loud in here. So, wanted to start out with a brief history of icons. Of course, I know there's a few people in here that have had to take art history classes before, so I'm sure they've encountered the whole icons come from the term icon from Greek, which means image, and traditionally they've been used more in a religious background. It wasn't until they started working with creating the graphical user interface in the 1970s that it became a term used with technology and computers. And it was introduced really to the world with the Xerox Star, the first GUI-driven PC in 1981, and then was spread beyond that with the use of icons in Windows and Apple operating environments. And of course, the first computer that really everybody could use and started showing up in homes and on workplaces and such is the 1984 Mac. Now, the 1984 Mac was the first one to bring it in, but Windows actually kind of took off more with it until Mac came back into resurgence. They've been playing tag for quite a while in terms of who's the most popular and with which group. So, for anyone who's worked with icons and knows the pain that we're going to discuss that icons can bring, you can blame Mac, because this is a quote that came out of their Apple Computer 1985. The book that came with it is "Icons can contribute greatly to the clarity and attractiveness of an application. The use of icons also makes it much easier to translate programs into other languages. Whenever an explanation or label is needed, consider using an icon instead of text." And this set, of course, the base for all these computer designs that have been going on for the 25 years since then. So we've all become rather accustomed to the icons that show up and take over our computer desktops. So there's some questions that come in when using an icon. Is it intuitive? If someone looks at it, are they going to automatically be able to figure out what it is and what they should do with it? How realistic is too realistic for an icon? Does this metaphor work? So this image that you've chosen, not only is it intuitive in terms of figuring out what it is, because that's not always the case, but is it going to make the right connection for somebody who's trying to use it? How important is labeling? And are our customers actually going to use it? I thought this was a great quote to go along with the section we're delving into, and instead of icons explaining, we have found that icons often require explanation. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is I'd like you to look at this image. Now, who's seen this before? Anyone not familiar with it? Any guess as to what it might mean?
Blue and red circles.
Would someone who has seen it before like to share with the rest of the room what this stands for?
The Flickr icon.
I had a Flickr account. Apparently I had one as of 5 years ago, although I didn't realize that until this past weekend because I hadn't used it in that time. But a couple of months ago, as you guys know, we were working on our newsletter redesign, and I was pulling in all these icons that were showing up on our webpage, and I saw this and had absolutely no clue what it was. I knew it had to be symbolic for some sort of program or website or something because it was grouped in with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, but had not a clue what it was. Now, if I had seen this, I would have made the connection because I know what Flickr is. I've heard of Flickr. I see people talk about Flickr, even if I don't use it personally. But two little dots next to each other, yeah, I had no clue what they are. And I spend, obviously, a lot of time online. So that whole icons needing explanation, if it's not truly intuitive, you're not going to get people without some education. So there's three different types of users that we generally encounter. We have the noobs, we have the intermediate users, and then we have the expert users online. And there's a quote from Thomas Pearson from his article, Anatomy of a Noob. Noobs in the digital space don't understand things holistically. They barely understand the basics. They lack any cognitive surplus to provide themselves with an overview of the environment they interact with. So I have a couple of other examples for you guys of icons that just didn't quite make the cut initially. Now before I show it to you, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Right around the time I was originally going to do this presentation, which was like in June, I think, I was at my parents' house and I was working with my mother on something on the computer, and my mom is not a noob. She has worked with computers since the time that they were filling a room. That was actually one of her jobs back in that time period. And I grew up with a computer in the house, so obviously there were computers in between that time and now. And she spends a decent amount of time online, but there are things that she just hasn't had to encounter to learn in that time. So there are things she hasn't quite made that intuitive leap to or figured out what the metaphor actually stands for. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Facebook and all of its many incarnations that have occurred in the last 5 years. I've had an account for over 5 years at this point and kind of just followed along with what these things were. So I'm talking to my mother about sending her a message on Facebook, and she told me she didn't know she had gotten it. So I was next to the computer with her, and I pointed at it and said, well, what about, didn't you look at the little messages box? It'll pop up and tell you how many messages you have. Oh, that's what that is? She's been on Facebook for at least 2 years at this point, did not realize that this is friend request, this is messages, and this is notifications, because really, what does the globe have to do with notifications? If you haven't taken the time to figure it out, you haven't looked up an explanation of it, she just ignored this whole side of the screen. Now, if you go to the next side of the screen, the right hand, you've got your home profile and account labels. These she used all the time. So she was obviously up in that navigation bar. She just was ignoring them because they meant nothing to her. Now another example is, how many of you guys have used Chrome? I know you guys are a pretty tech-savvy bunch, but if you look at this page, could you identify for me two things? One is, how do you add a new tab? And the other is, how would you print the page that you're looking for? Because there's no top navigation on here anymore. If you don't know hotkeys.
Is it on the picture of the document?
New tab is just that little plus right there.
L plus, and isn't there something over there, the settings?
Arrow in the document,
Of that little
Yeah.
document
which
thing.
I just learned
Yeah.
Exactly. So again, this is the same day, same temp period. I'm on the computer with my mom. My parents' computer is wacky, and it doesn't like Firefox or Internet Explorer. So therefore, the only browser that they can really rely on working on their computer is Chrome. And again, my mother, not a new person to the computer. She's used Firefox before, never actually saw that little tab, the little plus mark that's barely visible, at least on the projector, to the right of the tab that meant add another tab. So she had been going over to the toolbox, the little wrench over there, to add tabs this whole time. Now, the reason that she went to the wrench in the first place is she wanted to print. She never clicked on the document because to her, printing was a tool. It wasn't a document. It wasn't something, the document would be something she would think of typing or any of those type of things. She thinks of tools as a wrench, and that would be what all of those things that we use hotkeys for would fall under, and had been struggling with this for at least a month before she showed it to me and was telling me her frustrations on trying to figure this out. So, not intuitive to every user. Now, people that are used to the icons, they might have picked it up immediately, like some of us in this room, but there are no labels involved, so she didn't figure out what they were until someone came in and told her. So the next question on the list was realistic. Realistic details can get in the way of what you're trying to communicate to your users. And there's this great little comic illustration that shows how varying levels of realism can apply to different people. So if you look to the one on the far left, it's a very realistic picture. If you look to the one on the far right, it's a very unrealistic picture. But because it is not as specific, more people can apply to it. I mean, look at how many smiley faces you guys see spread across things in different places. But something towards the middle and just to the right can describe a lot of different people and things. So how does this apply to icons? Let's say you are at the mall, and would you expect to see this to find the men's bathroom? Or maybe this is a little more familiar. You guys would see this and you would realize, hey, that's probably the men's room. Now, I didn't get a chance to look and see when this particular icon came into existence in the world, but obviously we all grew up with, this is the sign that's going to be on the men's room door. So we would look at it and realize, oh, men's room. But I'm guessing when they first put it into existence, would you look at that and think bathroom if you didn't grow up with that symbol on the bathroom door? Or would this be a little more helpful? Or better yet if it said men's bathroom, but I couldn't find one that said that. So there's two things with this. Obviously it's a guy, at least to our perception. It could just be a human. Because if you don't have the woman in the dress next to him, you're not going to realize that there's really not just a general person there. But labels have become very important to distinguish between what different things are. So there's a quote from Jensen Harris. He has an article called The Importance of Labels, and it says, "It's pretty rare in the real world that we rely on iconography alone to represent ideas. Bathroom doors generally have an icon of a man and the word men, and stop signs have the word stop on them." Now, as I was discussing my presentation with David yesterday, he brought up that in eye tracking studies of like newspapers and reading online and all that, we cannot help but read words. So when you have just the guy standing there, it's pretty easy to look over. He's just some little dude. Maybe there's a brief recognition of, hey, there was something there. But it really doesn't make you stop and look, especially if he's just a black and white guy against a white screen. But when you see the word men, even if you're not really paying close attention, you guys automatically read that as soon as the slide came onto the screen. And the same thing is true if you're reading a newspaper. When we were talking about the newsletter, we talked about the fact that you go to the description underneath the picture before actually looking at the picture. When you're scanning a page, you go to the words, not the pictures initially. And the same thing is going to be true of if we went back to that Chrome page. The first thing that we would have gone to would have been the words on the page and not the images, even before we started looking for if there was a specific icon or image that we wanted to find. So speaking of labeling, Outlook is not my favorite form of software in the world, but all of us know people that use it, whether they really want to or not. And as they were working on trying to make the user experience of Outlook 98 better than those before, they tried to improve the toolbar structure. And one of the problems they noticed again and again amongst those noob and intermediate users was that they didn't use the toolbar at all when they were using the software. So through some testing and some experimenting, they decided to make one change that made a huge impact, and that was they added in those labels that you can see on the bottom bar. And almost immediately they saw a change in the behavior of their users to where people started using the toolbars and at every skill level, not just the experienced users. And I can speak from my personal experience with this program that I never knew what the little people in the middle were. So I never used them. I went to those file and edit and all of the things at the top to figure out where I needed to go. So another issue that can come up with icons outside of not understanding them or knowing what they actually are meant to do